The story starts with a young girl left stranded after a bunch of goblins attack the carriage she's riding in. Just as the goblins are about to finish her off, a mysterious boy shows up out of nowhere to save her. Fast forward a few years, and our protagonist Lewis is asked if he'd like to join a girl's party. Everyone around loses their minds when they hear that this girl actually wants to team up with him. Lewis himself is shocked, but the girl points to his sign, clearly advertising for party members. This girl is not backing down. She insists on joining him and proudly declares she's a martial artist. Lewis then awkwardly introduces himself as a sort of healer. But before things can go any further, an Adventurers Guild employee named Amherst rushes over, ready to stop this girl from making the biggest mistake of her life. Amherst then reveals that this guy has earned himself the nickname the Incompetent Lowest. Sure, he's a healer, but the dude only knows the most basic spell called Heal. He's just another labyrinth orphan like many others who lost their parents and had to become adventurers to survive. But even after all these years, Lois can't even cast an area heal or anything higher than the beginner spell, so he's infamous for being a complete joke. But despite his reputation, Lois somehow managed to join a party called Lightning Sword until they kicked him out recently for not knowing detoxification magic. Word has spread and now nobody wants him in their parties because, well, he's totally useless. Amherst, still trying to protect the girl, warns that if she parties up with Lois, she'll never make any money. But the girl Naru casually drops that she's already loaded. Amherst freaks out when she sees just how much cash Naru is lugging around, quickly explaining that most of the adventurers in this town are basically gangsters. The crowd of tough-looking folks around them proves her point, and she warns Naru to never flash that kind of money. Naru politely thanks her, and Amherst immediately realizes this girl is a total newbie to adventuring. So in true hustler fashion, Amherst offers to introduce her to a beginner's party, of course for a fee. But Naru shocks everyone when she flat out refuses because she's been dying to join Lois' party for a really long time. Lois and Naru then head out to sign some papers to make their party official, but Naru's practically burning holes in Lois' skull with her stare. For some reason, she's got this weird admiration for him, and meeting him again feels like a relief. Then the little oddball gets totally thrown off when Lois tells her to sign her name, but she quickly pulls herself together. Lois covers the guild fee, and just like that, their party is now officially. Once outside, Lois starts rambling about how no one's ever reached the deepest part of the Mardet Labyrinth. It's still shrouded in mystery, and no one even has a clue who or what the final boss is. Adventurers flock to Mardet City, hoping to strike gold, turning it into one of the biggest cities in the nation. Lois, being the psycho he is, wants to dive straight into the labyrinth right this second. Meanwhile, Naru's wondering if that's even remotely a good idea, considering their party is barely a few hours old. And also, before they left, Amherst gave Lois the heads up Naru's a newbie, so he should only take her to the grasslands for now. The labyrinth leaks magic power, spawning monsters in certain areas, and the grasslands are one of those spots. Thankfully, only weak monsters show up there. It's supposed to be the perfect training ground for rookies, but it's also annoyingly huge, making it hard to find anything to fight. The labyrinth, on the other hand, is jam-packed with creatures, and that's exactly what Lewis is itching for. He reassures Naru they'll be fine as long as they don't wander too deep, and if things go south, he's got it under control. His confidence is pretty wild for a healer, but he brushes it off like it's no big deal, and they press on. When they arrive, Naru insists on taking the lead. After all, she's a martial artist, so it makes sense for Lois to back her up as the healer. Lois does all for her confidence, but he can't help but wonder if she can actually fight. Naru quickly shuts down any doubts as she demolishes a group of goblins, and Lois is genuinely impressed. He explains that adventurers make their living by selling the magic stones monsters drop, and the guild buys them because they're valuable for all sorts of things. But he adds that she should already know this, even as a beginner. Sadly, goblin magic stones aren't worth much, so if they want to make real money, they'll need to take down stronger monsters. They both agree to go deeper into the dungeon for better loot, and Naru even vows to protect the fragile healer if anything goes wrong. Not long after, it's actually Lois saving her when he stops her from stepping on a trap. He shows her where she almost met her maker and explains that he spotted the trap thanks to the different colored tiles. Usually spotting traps is a thief's job, so Naru is baffled and asks how Lois did it as a healer. Lois casually replies that he's been an adventurer for a long time, so he's picked up a few tricks along the way. As they venture deeper, they come across a half-orc, which shouldn't be on this level of the dungeon. Half-orcs are mid-level demons, and their tough, hulking bodies make them a real challenge to defeat. Their strength is on par with monsters from the lower levels, so seeing one appear is definitely not normal. Naru's instincts tell her to turn tail and run, but Lois is convinced they can take it down if they work together. He doesn't want to push her into it, but to his surprise, she agrees because she trusts his judgment. Naru then kicks off the fight, but she's shocked when her first attack feels like she's kicking a brick wall. The beast may be slow, but Naru still takes a hit and things quickly go downhill. She finds herself cornered, the fight turning against her, but strangely the half-orc doesn't finish her off. Just then, Naru's eyes widen in disbelief as Lois comes out of nowhere, driving his sword right into the orc's chest, saving her at the last second. Lois is relieved that Naru is okay, but she can't help but wonder if this guy is really just a healer. Lois, as usual, brushes it off, explaining that his years as an adventurer taught him a few close combat tricks. Naru, still skeptical, points out that his attack didn't exactly look like a simple trick, but Lois distracts her by noting that she's injured. Naru tries to shrug it off, claiming it's no big deal, but Lois' healer instincts kick in. He knows even the smallest wounds need proper attention. Naru insists she's fine, but Lois heals her anyway, not taking no for an answer. The magic stone left behind by the orc is much larger than the goblin's stones and packed with way more magic power, meaning it'll fetch a nice price. Lois, satisfied with what he's seen from Naru's fighting skills, suggests they've earned enough money and can call it a day. But ever the fighter, Naru insists she can still go on, so the two continue, ready for more hunting. Later, Amherst is floored when she sees how many monsters Lois and Naru took down in just one day. So she quickly realizes Lois must have dragged the newbie into the labyrinth, and to make matters worse, the fact that they brought back an orc stone means he took her to the middle level. But Lois corrects her, saying they only went to the upper level. The orcs shouldn't have been there, but this lines up with what other adventurers have been saying. The higher-ups have been scrambling lately, so Amherst starts thinking something big might be happening in the labyrinth. Her mood quickly shifts though, as she's more than happy to pay them for their haul. Naru's weirded out by how excited Amherst is, so Lois explains that guild employees get a pay raise when they buy magic stones, but only from the adventurers they're in charge of. The more Lois and Naru earn, the more Amherst gets paid. Lois, still shocked by the size of the payout, has to be reminded by Amherst to split it with Naru. Lois would never forget, but he's stunned because even after splitting it, it's still 10 times more than he's ever made before. That realization hits him hard, and Lois sinks into a deep depression. Amherst steps in to explain to Naru that Lois had been completely swindled while in the Lightning Sword party. They never gave him his fair share of the rewards. Naru's absolutely furious when she hears this, and she demands that the guild do something about it. But the decision is up to Lois, and he chooses to let it go. He's happy with his new party, and just wants to forget the past. As they leave, a mysterious man watches them from the shadows. Later, the greedy Amherst is counting her hard-earned cash, but she's startled when the man appears. It's Handsome, her boss, and he's worried she might have helped Lois find a new party. Amherst brushes it off, saying she doesn't have some magical power of persuasion strong enough to convince someone to join Lois's party. Instead, she explains there was just this girl who saw something special in him. Handsome seems to know who this blue-haired girl is, but for some reason, it clearly troubles him. That night, Lois is shocked to find out that word of him getting a new party member has already spread like wildfire across the city. Apparently, the notoriously incompetent Lois picking up some poor fool to join his party is big news. Lois then moves to reserve a room, and Naru gets flustered at the idea of sharing one with him. Lois quickly decides they should sleep in separate rooms, but this seems to leave Naru a little disappointed. They go into their rooms for the night, and Naru's thoughts drift back to when she was healed. Turns out Naru was the girl from the carriage, and Lois was the guy who rescued her. After he healed her, she was so grateful. But Lois, in typical fashion, apologized for not being able to do more. Despite all that, Naru stayed weirdly optimistic, even though the goblins probably massacred everyone else in the carriage. She didn't seem to care and just swore she'd become an adventurer. From that day on, Naru was dead set on joining Lois' party, promising to protect him. Since then, Naru's been training like crazy, waiting for the chance to be by Lois' side. Then the moment she heard that Lois got booted from his party, she rushed straight to the city. The little stalkers thrilled her plan worked perfectly. Not only did she form a party with Lois, but they even took down an orc together. She's doing everything for him, so it crushes her when she realizes he didn't even recognize who she was. It makes sense though, her appearance has changed so much since then. But that's not the only thing that's different. Lois is way stronger than she remembers, and it doesn't seem like he even needs her protection anymore. Snapping herself out of it, Naru reminds herself of her promise to protect Lois no matter what. She then re-energized to get ready for bed, but one thing still bugs her. How in the world do people call Lois incompetent when he's actually insanely powerful? The story then flashes back to Lois fighting a Hydra alongside his old party. It's clear they're struggling badly. The party's thief is injured, and Lois uses his healing spell on her. She asks him if it can cure poisons, and he explains that it can't, but if he boosts her physical strength, she'll be able to fight off the poison on her own. The thief isn't thrilled and complains about it, but before she can finish, their arrogant leader cuts in, demanding they stop whining and get back into the fight when she's healed. The thief is fed up and snaps at the moron of a leader, telling him she's in no shape to fight, so the leader turns to Lois and orders him to take care of her. Lois is already frustrated and reminds the leader that he told him to bring antidotes for this exact situation. Of course, the leader had been too cheap to buy them, complaining they were too expensive. Now, in typical fashion, he blames Lois for not being able to do more, even accusing him of being a useless healer who can only cast basic healing spells. The leader then desperately yells at their terrified magician Armia to cast a spell, so she shakingly manages to fire off a fireball, but doesn't do shit against the Hydra. At this point, the leader is fed up, thinking his whole team is pathetic. Realizing they're completely outmatched, he chickens out and orders a retreat, running away like a coward. Armia follows him, and Lewis is left to help Siberia escape by supporting her on his shoulder. The next day, instead of reflecting on their own mistakes, the party blames Lois for their failure and kicks him out. Lois is completely taken aback by that shit. Then Siberia is also accusing him of being the reason they couldn't beat the Hydra. But Lois calmly points out the real reason. They stayed up partying until dawn, so neither the leader nor Siberia were at their best during the battle. The leader, now feeling attacked, asks if Lois is blaming them. Lois insists he's not, but they all turn to Armia for the final word. But the leader gives her intimidated looks, so she buckles under the pressure and throws Lois under the bus by pointing the deadly finger at his sorry ass. We then learn that Lois was dreaming about the past and wakes up shaken. He reflects that maybe this incident bothered him more than he realized, considering it's still haunting his dreams. He grabs some water, thinking back to a similar situation from years ago. It was 6 years ago, and even then, he had already earned a reputation as an ignoramus. But despite that, he still held onto the dream of becoming a first-rate adventurer. That's when a party reached out to him offering him a spot, and Lois, eager for the chance, jumped right in. But they didn't bring him on as a healer. They used him as bait. They tossed him in front of monsters, expecting him to draw their attention while they stood back. Lois dodged their attacks, running for his life, and though he was used to being treated like this because after all, he was a labyrinth orphan, but it still got under his skin. Eventually, the monsters grew bored of him and turned on the rest of his party, killing all of them. Lois somehow managed to escape, but the sting of never being treated as a real adventurer stuck with him. It was then while wandering that he came across a group of goblins attacking a carriage, and beside it, a girl was hiding from the monsters. Even now, Lois isn't sure why he decided to help her. He fought the goblins, thinking maybe, just maybe, his worthless life could be traded to save hers, and that would at least give his death some meaning. But he wasn't strong enough, and the monsters knocked him out cold. When he regained consciousness, he saw the girl standing over him, relieved that he was awake. She explained that the Order of the Knights had arrived in time to save her, and Lois, feeling utterly useless, thought to himself that he truly was an idiot because he couldn't even save one girl. But to his surprise, she thanked him, saying that if it weren't for his help, the Knights wouldn't have arrived in time. She even told him that he looked cool while fighting, though Lois found it hard to believe. Noticing she was hurt, his instincts kicked in and he quickly used his healing spell on her. She thanked him again, and he replied that healing was all he could do. He then opened up to her about how his own party had used him as nothing more than bait. The girl was heartbroken when she heard how Lois had been treated like living bait, and she started crying for him. Then her tears quickly turned into determination, and she vowed that when she grew up, she would become an adventurer and join his party, and promised to protect him. Lois was touched by her words, but as she left with the Knights, he knew deep down that she was probably from a noble family, and that the chances of her becoming an adventurer, let alone joining his party, were slim. But her words gave him the courage he desperately needed, and with renewed hope, he decided to give adventuring another shot. Motivated by her promise, Lois sought out mentors who trained him in swordplay and magic. Though he was still primarily a healer and could only use his heal spell, he worked hard to master other skills, pushing himself beyond what he thought was possible. After completing his training, he finally found a new party to join, the Blades of Lightning. Looking back, it made sense why that dream resurfaced. He realized that if it weren't for that girl's words, he wouldn't be where he was now. And had he given up back then, he'd never have had the chance to see her again. Just as Lois reflects on this, Naru knocks on his door, asking if he wants to grab breakfast. Lois agrees, and they head out together. The scene then shifts to them in the labyrinth, where Lois announces they'll be heading to the lower levels today. Later, they find themselves standing in front of a teleportation circle. Naru excitedly mentions that she's never seen one before, so Lois explains that these circles aren't found in every labyrinth. This one was placed by a magician shortly after the labyrinth was discovered, but Uni doesn't know much more about it. Naru, then thinking of the possibilities, says it would be great if they could use it to teleport anywhere, but Lois clarifies that they can only use this circle to teleport to another circle. Naru then muses that it would have been a lot easier if the city had a teleportation circle, so she guesses they didn't install one in the city for fear that monsters might swarm in. Lois corrects her, explaining that monsters can't use these circles, but the real problem is that the knowledge to create new ones was lost centuries ago, so there's no way to make them anymore. They then activate the circle and teleport to the middle levels, and when they arrive, Lois warns Naru that the monsters here are stronger than those they fought before, urging her to stay alert and be careful. The scene shifts to Lois and Naru in the thick of battle against a group of monsters. Lois quickly dispatches his share, but when Naru lands a punch on one of the creatures, her fist goes right through its body like it's made of air. She confusedly looks to Lois, who tells her it's a lich, a monster made of pure spirit energy. It has no physical form, so normal attacks won't work on it. Naru, realizing he's right as she can see through the lich's body, listens as Lois advises they retreat since neither of them can use magic, putting them in a serious disadvantage. But Naru confidently mentions she can handle it, and Lois immediately understands what she's hinting at. We then see Lois skillfully drawing the lich's attention, giving Naru time to prepare her attack. As Lois runs, he explains that with enough training, people can control their prana, and it's an inner spirit energy, and they use it to fight spiritual beings like the lich. Then we see Naru infuse her fist with prana, and with one devastating punch, she obliterates the lich. She celebrates her victory, but Lois quickly notices that she's injured. Realizing she must have gotten hurt where she landed her attack, he pulls out a magic item and uses it to cast a healing spell on her. He explains that this particular item enhances healing spells thanks to the magic stone embedded inside. Lois goes on to tell her that the guild collects magic stones from adventurers, hands them over to craftsmen, who then forge them into magic items and return them to the adventurers. After Naru is fully healed, she asks Lois how much the magic stone they found is worth, and Lois estimates that it could fetch a good price. They then sell the stone to Amherst, who pays them generously for it. On their way back to the inn, Lois is pleasantly surprised by how much they earn from the sale. As they stroll through the streets, they notice a commotion, so they curiously move in closer to get a better look, and they see two adventurers in the middle of a heated argument, looking like they're about to throw hands. Lois then tells Naru that fights like this have become pretty common around here lately, and he explains that adventurers who've caused trouble elsewhere have been flocking to this town recently. Naru recalls that Amherst mentioned something similar, and as they look around, they see rough-looking adventurers everywhere. Lois sighs, thinking it's become a real pain in the neck for the more respectable adventurers, but he quickly shifts the conversation, suggesting they treat themselves to something fancy since they've just been paid. The scene cuts to them at the inn enjoying a lavish meal. The innkeeper looks a bit nervous, wondering if Lois can actually cover the cost of all of this, but Lois grins, reassuring her not to worry as he orders some ale. Naru, not wanting to be left out, asks for ale too, but she's immediately denied, told she's too young to drink, so she huffs, clearly not happy about being treated like a kid. Then once they finish eating, Naru asks Lois about a strange tower she's noticed at the edge of town. She's seen similar structures popping up all over the city. Lois admits it's odd and tells her that he once got curious and asked the builders about it. To his surprise, even they didn't know who commissioned the towers or why. Naru, wide-eyed, is shocked, and Lois explains further. The builder was hired by an agent, who was representing another agent, and so on. It's a long chain of middlemen, and whoever's really behind it doesn't want to be found. Lois shrugs it off, saying it doesn't really matter as long as no one's getting hurt. To him, it's just a sign that there are plenty of strange people in the world, and he jokingly adds that they'd be better off building a wall around the city instead of these mysterious towers. Naru, thinking it over, points out that the city doesn't even have a wall. She admits she likes how open it feels, but Lois brings up a good point. It could be a real problem if war broke out, so he asks her how they'd stop invaders. But without hesitation, Naru replies that with so many adventurers around, there's no need to worry. They'll protect the city from anything that comes their way. Lois agrees with her, and with that, the two of them head off to their room for the night. But before Lois enters his room, Naru tries to stop him, clearly wanting to say something, but the words just won't come out. Instead, she awkwardly wishes him a good night. Once in her room, she lies on her bed, thinking about how much she wishes she had the courage to ask to stay in Lois' room, but she just can't bring herself to say it. Meanwhile, Lois lies in his own bed, feeling grateful to be part of a party again. He's unsure if he'll ever see that little girl from his past, but thanks to Naru, he feels like he can keep adventuring for a while longer. The scene then cuts to the Blades of Lightning. Their leader Margulis introduces the party's new healer Lyra, but she doesn't get the warmest welcome from the other members, which makes her feel a little uneasy. Still, Margulis is confident that with this new team, they'll finally be able to defeat the Hydra. Next, the scene shifts to a dark and eerie place. Handsome is seen informing someone that the sleeping princess is currently in the city and has formed a party with Lois, pretending to be just another adventurer. The old man he's speaking to is surprised to hear Lois is still in town, so he remarks that they need to get rid of him, as time is running out, and Handsome agrees as they plot their next move. Then we see that the party heads back to the swamp to face the Hydra, and luckily the beast hasn't regrown its heads yet, so it won't be as much of a nightmare to deal with. Margulis then quickly lays out a plan. He and Lyra will attack from the front, Armia will provide magic support, and Siberia will sneak up from behind for a surprise strike. He's all set to charge in when Lyra suddenly calls a timeout, flat out refusing to be on the front lines because after all she's a healer, not a tank. Margulis is baffled and says that Lois, their last healer, fought right alongside them in the thick of battle. Lyra is stunned because she can't believe that they made a healer to be with them on the front line, but Lois never seemed to mind. In fact, Siberia chimes in, recalling that Lois got some killer hits in, even being the one who chopped off one of the Hydra's heads. Lyra is still in disbelief, but Margulis quickly reassures her because he doesn't expect her to pull off anything crazy like that. And if she says she can't handle the front lines, that's totally fine. But to be sure, he asks if she can at least cast Detoxify to counter the Hydra's poison, and that Lyra can definitely do. So with that settled, Margulis orders everyone into position because it's time to slay the Hydra once and for all. Meanwhile, back in town, Lois and Naru have just returned from another successful trip into the labyrinth, and Amherst is happy to see they've brought back a haul of gems to sell. Still, she can't help but remind Lois not to push Naru too hard, considering she's still a newbie adventurer. Lois reassures her, saying he's being careful about the fights they get into. Amherst is relieved to hear it, but she points out that a two-person party has its limits, so she suggests that they think about recruiting more members to make things easier. Lois agrees that a bigger party would lighten the load, but ultimately, he decides it's not worth the hassle because he and Naru are already raking in the cash as they are. Amherst admits he's got a point, considering how much they've been making, and even they could probably rent a house instead of staying at the inn if they really wanted to. Naru had no clue you could actually rent a house in the city, so Amherst explains there's only so much gear and loot you can stash at an inn. But when you've got a private room, storage isn't an issue, though it comes with a hefty price tag. But then she adds with a smirk that the real perk is the extra privacy. Especially if you've got a male and female party, let's just say late-night activities become a lot more convenient. For some reason, Maru suddenly seems very interested in renting a private house, but when Amherst notices Lois' lack of reaction, she figures late-night activities aren't on the table for them. Speaking of private houses, Lois recalls that Lightning Blade had one too, although not so glamorous for him because they made him sleep in the storage closet, which was about as comfortable as it sounds. Amherst then laughs at how badly Lois got treated, but she gives him a silver lining. Getting kicked out of Lightning Blade was probably the best thing that ever happened to him because since he left, Margulis and his crew haven't completed a single mission. Then we see Margulis wondering why he can't figure out why they've been failing, but Lyra knows exactly why. He's too thick to realize he's not strong enough to take on a Hydra head-on. Margulis overhears her, and he's about to start shouting, but Lyra shuts him down, telling him to be quiet so she can focus on healing Armia. Armia was seriously injured and poisoned, and Lyra needs all the concentration she can get. While Lyra works, Siberia admits to Margulis, though she hates to say it, that Lois might have been more valuable than they gave him credit for. Sure, he sucked at healing, but he always got the job done in the end. Plus, he never noticed they were scamming him out of his pay, making him the perfect party member. Margulis, now wishing Lois hadn't quit, needs a reminder from Siberia that he was the one who kicked Lois out, and made a big scene while doing it too. Margulis had completely forgotten about that, but now that he remembers, he figures getting Lois back should be easy. All they need to do is ask, and Margulis is sure Lois will come running back. After all, who would turn down the chance to rejoin the famous Blades of Lightning? Though Siberia is starting to wonder if she even wants to stay in the party at this point. By the next morning, Lyra finally finishes healing Armia. Armia then wakes up and thanks her for the help, but Lyra is just glad she could do something useful. She then checks if Armia feels well enough to eat, and when Armia says she does, Lyra heads downstairs to grab some food. However, once she gets down there and asks where the food is stored, she realizes Siberia and Margulis are nowhere to be found, leaving her completely clueless about where they might have gone. Meanwhile, Margulis and Siberia are at the guild, and of course Margulis is making a scene, and he loudly declares that he's willing to let Lois graciously return to his party. Once more, the entire room freezes in disbelief, with Lois being the most shocked of all. He then asks Margulis to repeat himself, because surely no one could say something that stupid. Margulis repeats himself, so Lois' ears weren't deceiving him. And now Lois is just not sure how to even respond to such an idiotic offer. At the same time, Naru and Amherst witness the spectacle. Amherst explains to Naru that the loud blonde guy is the same genius who kicked Lois out of his party, and now he's trying to bring him back with this condescending nonsense. Lois is visibly unamused by Margulis' pompous speech, but before he can speak, Margulis cuts in, assuming Lois might still be bitter about being scammed out of his pay while in their party. Margulis, in his usual clueless fashion, apologizes and pretends it was all just an innocent mistake, and he promises that this time, Lois will get his fair share. Besides, they really need him now since the new healer is pretty much useless in a fight. Siberia watches in disbelief, sure that Lois would never agree to this absurd request. But to her complete shock, Lois actually thanks Margulis for the offer. Naru, furious at the thought of Lois being snatched away, storms in front of him and starts yelling at Margulis, telling him there's no way Lois will ever join their party again. Lois gently touches her shoulder, calming her down and reassures Naru she has nothing to worry about because he's not going anywhere. He then turns to Margulis and says that he was only being polite when he said thanks, but he has zero interest in rejoining his party ever. Margulis can't believe he just got turned down, so he starts scrambling, accusing Naru of trying to keep Lois for herself because she finally realized how valuable he is. The guy's aggressive finger-pointing is starting to seriously irritate Lois, so he grabs Margulis by the wrist, leans in and flatly warns him that if he ever so much as thinks about hurting Naru, he'll end up with a body so mangled even his own mother wouldn't recognize him. With that, Lois turns to leave, and Naru, never one to miss a chance, takes a second to rub it in Margulis' face. After they walked out, Margulis is left standing there, clueless and pissed off. He still wants to take down the Hydra though, so he shouts at Amherst, demanding she recommend a new adventurer for his party, preferably one who can actually handle fighting on the front lines with him. Amherst, already fed up with his nonsense, is about to tell him off, but she's saved from the hassle when an adventurer steps out from the crowd, and this guy looks like he's already beaten the final boss and is just here to mop up the extras. The mysterious man then offers to join Margulis' party and casually asks if his strength is up to Margulis' standards. Margulis sizes him up, and yeah, the guy looks like he could bench press a mountain, but Margulis wants to be sure. So he draws his sword and charges at him, but it's a bad move because with just one swing, the man disarms Margulis in an instant, leaving him looking like a complete idiot in front of the entire guild. Trying to recover from the humiliation, Margulis reluctantly accepts him into the party. Siberia, on the other hand, isn't so sure because she's suspicious of anyone who walks around wearing a mask all the time. But Margulis doesn't care because if they don't take down the Hydra, Lightning Blade's already shaky reputation will sink faster than a stone in a pond. He then walks over to the guy and asks for his name, and the man simply says that his name is Shig. Meanwhile, back at the inn, Naru is admiring herself in the mirror when she hears someone knocking at Lois's door. She curiously steps out to check who it is and finds Sheila standing there. For a moment, her mind jumps to the worst, thinking Sheila's here to make a move on Lois. But after thinking it over for a moment, she realizes that's probably not the case. Once Lois finally opens the door, Sheila informs him that he's got guests waiting for him downstairs. Surprised but curious, Lois decides to see what's going on. When he gets downstairs, Lois and Naru are met by Armia and Lyra. Armia, looking guilty, apologizes for making such a bold request, but asks if Lois could help them out just this once. Margulis is still hell-bent on taking down that Hydra and even hire a new warrior for the mission, but Lyra doesn't think it'll be enough. For starters, Margulis is too stubborn to buy antidote potions because, well, they cost money, and he is never going to realize how reckless he's being until someone winds up dead. Armia knows it's way too late to apologize now, but she acknowledges how strong Lois is. If he hadn't cut off the Hydra's head last time, their whole party would have been wiped out. Lois downplays his role and says he didn't do that much. But Lyra quickly points out that even with two of the Hydra's heads already gone, the party barely survived, and if the beast had been in perfect condition, they would have been toast. Lois, now curious, asks Armia what exactly she's asking of him. Armia stands up and says she wants Lois to fight with him again because she's convinced they can defeat the Hydra if he's there. Basically, she's asking him to rejoin Lightning Blade, but Lois had that conversation with Margulis earlier, and his answer hasn't changed. Naru then confusedly wonders why Armia is so determined to help Margulis when the whole situation seems like a nightmare for her. Armia admits Margulis has more flaws than she can count, and that's being generous, but for better or worse, he's still her party member. Naru becomes angry after hearing this, and she reminds Armia that Lois was her party member too, but she did absolutely nothing to support him when he was being mistreated. Armia, now in tears, begins apologizing to Lois, and she explains that at the time she was terrified because if she didn't follow Margulis' lead, she would have been kicked out of the party too. As a new adventurer, she didn't know anyone else to turn to. Now, though she realizes how wrong she was and how wrong Margulis was for how he treated Lois, but even though she doesn't agree with Margulis' methods, she still doesn't want him to get himself killed in a battle he can't win. Lyra then tells Lois that Armia is genuinely sorry for everything and has been tormenting herself over it for a long time. And while she understands if Lois doesn't want to help, she asks that he at least accept Armia's apology. Lois then stands up, looks at Armia, and says he holds no grudge against her. He accepts her apology but makes it clear he still has no plans to rejoin Lightning Blade. Armia is disappointed, but she respects his decision and promises not to bring it up again. Right then, Mary shows up carrying a feast to lift Armia's spirits, noticing that she clearly hasn't been eating well. While Armia digs in, Lois turns to Lyra and asks if there's any way for her to get Armia out of Margulis' party, but Lyra frustratedly replies that if she could have done that, she wouldn't have come to him in the first place. Knowing full well how Margulis treats people, Lois suggests that Lyra should leave the party, but Lyra flat out refuses, explaining that leaving Armia to fend for herself under that idiot's leadership isn't an option. The next day, Margulis finally introduces Lyra to Shig, since they're heading out to face the Hydra again. The moment Lyra sees him, though, something clicks and she recognizes him from somewhere. So she pulls Shig aside for a word, asking why he's hiding his identity and what he's doing here. Shig, trying to act clueless, denies ever meeting her and attempts to walk away. But as he turns, Lyra catches sight of the sword on his back, a sword that once belonged to someone named Ronaldo. She immediately accuses him of stealing it, but Shig denies being a thief and claims the sword was given to him as a gift. While he clears himself of theft, his connection to Ronaldo confirms for Lyra that this is the same Shig she knew from the past. Still, she decides to keep his secret for now, figuring there must be a reason he's hiding his identity. Later that day, Lois and Naru head into the labyrinth as usual. But something nags at Lois because he can't shake the worry about Armia and the rest of Lightning Blade, and he's got no clue if they're truly prepared for the battle they're walking into. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part.